Today's episode will be audio only, but Thursday's preview pod will have video again, and there will be a film room episode this week as well. So stay tuned, and I appreciate you all for listening. Welcome to the Philly Film Room podcast. Today we get to talk about something that we have not talked about in almost an entire calendar year, and it's the Philadelphia Eagles getting a blowout victory. It's the first time that they have won by more than one possession since the Miami Dolphins game of last year. And it's about damn time, as we've been building to this on both sides of the ball. The offense has been on the cusp of a big day for several weeks now, while the defense has been making strides leading into the game. And they already had a couple of dominant games. And with this game, they have now allowed 0 touchdowns in half of their games that they have played. So let's stop wasting time and see what the Eagles did to earn that blowout victory. When we look at this game offensively, it was all about the offensive line, Saquon Barkley, and the ground game overall. They had a 45-15 run-pass ratio, which led to 269 yards on the ground. It was a dominant performance reminiscent of 2022, which wore the defense out, and you could really tell that they had quit by the end. A lot of the guys were getting put on skates. And the crazy part is that was with 2 backup offensive linemen and backup tight ends in a game where they played a ton of 12 personnel. So they really ran the ball down the Giants' throat with a somewhat not healthy team, right? The Giants' offensive line got worked when they missed one of their offensive linemen. We missed 2 and kicked the living shit out of them, right? So that is a scary thought for the rest of the NFL. But what did the Eagles do on the ground? Well, their attack was multiple. They had a ton of different variations in the run game. They ran standard, inside zone. They ran at least 3 different variations of split zone. They ran outside zone, they ran counter, they ran quarterback bash. There was other plays in addition to that with other wrinkles as well. There's a reason why the Giants couldn't get a grasp of this run game, and they just kept showing them so many different looks that they couldn't stay on top of it. But this really looks like the Kellen Moore offense in full effect, right? He started the game with under center play action pass. We saw another play where he used Devontae Smith on a jet sweep action to run outside zone. I bet we're going to come and see that handed off to Devontae Smith at some point in the season. Or maybe we saw this later in the game with Will Shipley. Maybe Will Shipley gets to see his role increase and he gets to be the guy running some of that stuff. And now we're talking about Anais Smith is about to get elevated from the practice squad or from the IR with Paris Campbell now being released. That was a role that we envisioned with Anais Smith coming into the season after we had drafted him, right? So we're starting to see this Kellen Moore offense build. And we're really seeing more and more evidence of the Kellen Moore scheme taking over just through the types of formations and motions that they used. It really felt like this was the first game where it was a full-on Kellen Moore offense. And I don't think I could really identify a play that I remember that I would say was a Nick Sirianni staple. So that was interesting to see. But we got to talk about who this game was really all about. And it was about Saquon Barkley. In week 7, he was first in rushing yards with 176. He was also first in yards after contact with 107. He was second in rushing yards over expectation per attempt, and he was second in yards per carry at 10.4. His 21.9 miles per hour was the fastest of his career, which is crazy to think about. It's clear that injuries in 2022 and 2023 really took a toll on him. I knew the 2022 injury really did. He missed some time early in 2023. I didn't know it was affecting him quite to the degree that it was affecting him at, right? And I know a lot of people say, well, the Giants didn't give him any runways to get up to speed. He had enough opportunities to get up to these 21 mile per hour runs. He just wasn't getting there. And I think a lot of it had to do with injury. But his ability to hit these top speeds, his ability to create for himself, and doing that while running behind an offensive line that ranks 4th in the NFL in yards before contact per attempt, well, that's going to lead to a breakaway run rate that is 4th highest in the NFL. And then you add in his size and his strength, makes him an excellent power runner in the goal line as well. And we saw how he was able to push his way in for a touchdown, much to the dismay of my fantasy team. But if I had to say, through the first 7 weeks of the season, who was the MVP of the Philadelphia Eagles? I would have to say that it's Saquon Barkley. And I know people are going to tell me, well, it can't be Saquon because he was probably directly responsible for losing the Atlanta Falcons game with that drop. Well, not in my eyes, right? Because the defense was also responsible for not letting the opposing offense go 80 yards down the field in 30 seconds. It's a team game. Did he drop that ball? Sure, but he's made 100 other plays that you just cannot overlook. So if I had to say MVP of this team through the first 7 weeks, I'd say Saquon. But let me know in the comments who you think would be the MVP of the team through the first 7 weeks on your end. I'd like to hear some other thoughts and opinions. Now, I do want to talk about this guy, and I'm workshopping a name right now. Let me know what you guys think about this nickname. And it's going to be Ben Mike Alstott Van Sumeren. Can you think of a name that rolls off the tongue a little smoother and easier than that? I don't think so. But in all seriousness, this is a role for Ben Van Sumeren that I think is really going to grow. And if you follow me on Twitter, when it came out that the Eagles weren't going to elevate another tight end on game day, it was clear that this was going to be the Ben Van Sumeren game, or he was going to have some type of role. I shouldn't say the Ben Van Sumeren game. He played like 5 snaps, but he was going to have some type of role on the team. And when you look at Ben Van Sumeren's career, he played fullback in college before switching to running back and then eventually transferring to Michigan State and then playing linebacker. So he has previous experience doing that. And then you look at his athletic ability too, right? That can be a huge weapon for this offense. Don't forget, this guy ran a 4.3 40 at his pro day. You add that type of speed to this offense, I mean, he's faster than A.J. Brown. That's crazy. That is crazy to think about. And he could be our fullback. We talked about it in the offseason that Kellen Moore likes to use fullbacks in his offense. And we speculated that it would be a good role for Albert O, so you didn't have to put him on the line of scrimmage where he's not very good. And you can leak him out to the flats and where he can catch underneath routes and use his athleticism to turn up the field. But you know who's more athletic than Albert O? Ben Van Sumeren. So I wouldn't be surprised at some point in time you see Ben Van Sumeren leak out into the flat, he catches a pass, and turns up the field for a 40-yard touchdown. So I think this role is actually awesome for Ben Van Sumeren. And then when you look at the end of the game, when they put Oren Burks and Jeremiah Trotter in the game, Ben Van Sumeren didn't get a snap there. Maybe they're seeing that this could be a real role for him. And don't forget, they used him in a training camp situation, a one-on-one training camp situation, running a route against Andre Sam, a safety, and he dusted him. So there's something here, and we'll see what it is. But moving on to some other guys, I thought Tyler Steen really stepped up. He looked good overall in the run game and in the pass game. He had much better strike timing and posture and pass pro, and while I still think it can improve, it was huge steps over what we saw in his first start last year as a rookie. And I think that's to be expected, but he has a great blend of foot quickness and strength that really, to go along with his size, you really start to see the potential that Jeff Stoutland saw in Tyler Steen. And I did think it was funny that when Mekhi Becton went down, we talked about this on the podcast in the past, that we had speculated the reason we thought they weren't running more outside zone was because of the fact that Mekhi Becton and Landon Dickerson to a degree, but more so Mekhi Becton, they're just not really suited to be an outside zone dominant run team with a guard like that. So I thought it was funny. The first play that Tyler Steen steps in, they run outside zone. I don't know. It's a little confirmation bias on my end, but you never know. Will Shipley also got to play a little bit in this game as well, and he didn't do too much. It was also a tough situation he was put in. There were some backup offensive linemen in the game. It was clear the Eagles were going to run the ball just about every single time that he was in the game. So the defense was really prepared and loaded up to stop the run. But what I wanted to pay attention to was Will Shipley's ball handling, right? His ball security. Because that was a concern of mine coming into this season. And I thought it was going to be the biggest hindrance for him getting more playing time was going to be ball security and pass pro. I really like what I saw out of his ball handling this game. And when I talk about that, I'm not talking about just putting 2 hands on the ball, because you can't run with 2 hands on the ball every single time. The majority of the time, you're going to run with 1 hand on the ball, right? But how are you holding the ball? Are you holding the ball with your hand above your wrist above your elbow, right? So high and tight, close to your body. Or is he, like every time he cuts, is he dropping it so that his wrist is now parallel with the ground, right? We don't want to see that. What I really like seeing was what happened when he went to lower his shoulder, because what happens when guys dip their shoulder down, a lot of times that ball gets exposed on the back end as you lower your shoulder. So a good coaching point is to take that hand and try and squeeze your opposite pec, right? Try and put like, so think if if the ball's in your right hand, when you go to lower your shoulder, think about putting your hand over your heart, right? Putting it over your left pec when you lower your shoulder. That's going to force you to overemphasize really tucking that ball in tight and not giving that extra uh, space and that air behind for the ball to get punched out, right? And I saw Will Shipley do that. So good stuff to see from Will Shipley, to see the strides and improvements he's making. We'll definitely want to see some more of that. And I want to see him in some pass pro because I think that's going to be an area that we really need to pay attention with, especially when we look at Kenny Gainwell. He had a whiffed block in this game. Now, he did have a number of good, tough runs, good plays in the passing game as well, catching the ball. And his role, I don't think his role is going anywhere. This team, they really trust him at this point in time. I don't think there's any reason why Will Shipley needs to be playing over Kenny Gainwell. Gainwell had a good game as well, but he did have that one whiffed block that does need to get cleaned up, but it has been somewhat of a habit of his over his career. But you know what? He did get bailed out by Jalen Hurts on that play. And looking at Jalen Hurts, we just got to call a spade a spade. He had a bit of an up and down performance. He only passed 14 times, and he did have 10 completions for 114 yards and a touchdown. And he had that big time throw to AJ for a touchdown on 4th down. But the reason it was on 4th down is because of missing a very easy read on 3rd down that he probably should have taken, right? And that was indicative of a number of other plays that came up throughout the game where he just wasn't right with his reads or his footwork was off. You could tell that I really think Fred Johnson being in the lineup caused some panic for Jalen. We talked about it in the pregame pod. Fred Johnson had been giving up a lot of pressures. The majority of those pressures were him finding his anchor late, right? So what happens then is he's getting pushed into the quarterback. And when the pocket gets tight, Jalen doesn't hang in tight pockets to the same degree as less mobile players. He has the ability to get out of that stuff, right? So sometimes he does have the tendency to tend to bail a little bit earlier, especially in situations where he probably could have maneuvered and worked in the pocket in certain situations a little bit better, right? And there was one play where he could have helped Fred Johnson out, especially, and it was a play where Fred gave up the sack. Fred pushed his guy 10 yards up the field. If he is able to get the defensive end 10 yards up the field before they're turning the corner, the quarterback needs to be able to help him out and step up in that situation. So I'm not going to punish Fred too much for that play. But listen, overall, there was just a couple of panic moments for Jalen. I think once he gets more comfortable with Johnson in the lineup, knowing that they can win with Johnson in the lineup, that things will get a little bit better. And it's probably going to just be a temporary thing anyways until Mailata gets back. But I think a lot of people are questioning why Fred Johnson didn't get more help, right? Especially during the game. We noticed some plays where he's just one-on-one a lot. And honestly, I think the coaching staff does feel comfortable letting him go one-on-one, even against guys like Brian Burns. He did lock up Brian Burns a number of times, right? And a lot of people are going to say this is a Nick Sirianni decision or a Kellen Moore decision, but at the end of the day, when they sit down there and they discuss player meetings, the position coaches are in there too, and they are giving their opinions. And their opinions matter a ton because they are sitting there with their guys day in and day out. They know their guys and their position better than any other coach on that field or in that room, excuse me. So when you sit down on those meetings leading up your game plan meeting for that week, the position coach is going to be there. And Jeff Stoutland absolutely has a say in how they're going to design their pass protections with a guy like Fred Johnson out there. And they did some things to help him out, but there was a number of times that he was out there one-on-one, and you could tell they felt comfortable with him. So hopefully that can lead to Jalen feeling a little bit more comfortable. I think we can get a better performance next time around out of Jalen with a better understanding of his line. But we do have there is a tougher matchup next week for Fred Johnson than this week. So we'll get to that next week, though. But there's a one play that I did want to touch on, and it was a trick play. And first, I thought it was funny. I just had a laugh when it happened. I just had a laugh because I was at my friend's house when this play happened. And he's not an Eagles fan. I live in Chicago. He's not an Eagles fan. So I was explaining to him that the Eagles had struggled on offense in the first quarter this year. They had not scored a touchdown yet in the first quarter this year. And I told him, I'm not even sure if they made it past a 50-yard line in the first quarter this year. And then we make it past the 50-yard line on the 15th play of the game. And the very next play, they run some wildcat trick play with Saquon Barkley. They lose yardage, and they're back on the opposite side of the 50-yard line again. And at that point in time, you just gotta laugh at what life gives you. But again, at the end of the day, it all worked out for the best. So sometimes you do need to laugh. But let's talk about that trick play because a lot of people didn't like it. And I'll say this: sometimes we just argue about process versus results versus execution. Did the play not work? No, but the defense also sent a slot corner blitz. And it's not like they had put this play on tape for the defense to be prepared for prior to this game. So sometimes the defense just calls a play that works out and is a good play call against what the offense had on. But when you run a play like this makes opposing offenses have to prepare for it. Even if it takes away 5 to 10 minutes of their time during that week, that time could have been used to prepare for something else. It could have been used to prepare for something that would be much more of a staple concept that they would be needing to prepare for. Right? So even if it doesn't work, you have to think of the fact that Saquon Barkley is probably going to be playing some wildcat snaps in this offense. And you can really see this play branching into other options. You can easily see the reverse option to Devontae Smith coming back around. And then you can easily see the reverse tossback option as well, where Jalen gets the ball, almost like a double flea flicker type of play, right? Now, this is where the process versus results versus execution comes in. If the play worked out, nobody would have cared what happened. They just would have cared about the results. But at the end of the day, it really wasn't even about the play call. Gainwell whiffed on a block. If he got that block, that play probably works. And if it works, everyone's calling it a genius play. But don't forget, this was the 15th play of the game, and it was the first play past the 50-yard line. So just running a regular play isn't a guarantee of success. Now, moving on to the defense. In the preview pod, we noted that Fangio had faced Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll last year and had this to say about their matchup.
He did face Fangio in 2023, and they fucked his ass up. 6 sacks, 11 pressures, 119 passing yards, and the offense had 85 rushing yards overall. Both backs were under 2.5 yards a carry, and the Dolphins won 31-16. So Fangio knows this Giants team.
When these two teams play again on January 5th, Daniel Jones might need to call in sick. In this game, he took 8 sacks, another 3 quarterback hits, and 11 more hurries. Overall, the Giants quarterbacks were pressured at a 55% rate. Everyone got in on the sack party, with Jalen Carter and Nakobe Dean notching 2 apiece. Nolan Smith, Josh Sweat, Bryce Huff, and Jalix Hunt each had 1. And don't look now, but the Eagles are 4th in sack rate. And we talked about how the sacks would come once they got better at first down. And now they're coming in bunches. I'm telling you, this team has too much talent on their front line to not be a good pass rush unit. And so when we see opportunities for them to get after some of these teams, and especially teams that aren't like the first few weeks when we were playing teams that are very much designed to limit sacks and it shows in the stats. Well, that also plays out on the defensive side. And especially when we couldn't get them out of their typical offenses because we couldn't stop them on early downs. But now you get these drop back passing teams and you start to see the players show. You start to see Fangio's pressure schemes and his stunt schemes and his ways that he manipulates manipulates protections. That all starts to show up once you can win on first down. But we also have to talk about the fact that if you're going to have an environment for an 8-sack game, you're going to need some other factors to go in your favor. You're probably going to need a couple of factors like a bad offensive line, a bad offense in general, an injured offensive line, and probably a coverage unit behind that can buy you enough time so that your front can get there. And that is exactly what happened in this game. The guys on the back end were playing so well together, sinking into throwing windows and passing routes off. This game reminded me very much of the New Orleans Saints game from 2022, with the way that the amount of sacks that they had in that game, a lot of those sacks were results of coverage sacks. And then you got a few just really good plays from the front mixed in as well. But you start to see this defense play like this together, where they're passing stuff off like this. It's going to be a scary good defense. They have talent in a lot of areas. And a lot of guys that we didn't even think were going to step up and be the type of players that they are starting to step up. And it's like, this is turning into, you're starting to see that this is turning into a year where some of those risks are starting to hit. So we'll see how they put this all together. But looking more specifically into this game, this defense only allowed 119 yards overall. Let me say that again, 119 yards overall. Saquon Barkley had 107 yards after contact. They averaged 2.2 yards per play. It must have been a tough day to be a Giants fan, but you know what? I couldn't give a rat's ass. What did the defense do, though? They ran their highest rate of split field coverages this season. And with the Giants often having a tight end chip or just stay into block in general with their star left tackle out of the game, it allowed a safety to roam the middle of the field because they didn't have to carry that tight end if you ran on a route vertical up the field. In addition to that, we talked about taking away Malik Neighbors coming into the game. And we didn't do this every single time, but we did see a number of plays where they would rotate a deep safety over top of him and have a corner playing underneath. And on top of that, we also saw a number of Fangio's weak side pressures come into play, particularly his whip pressure. And I made a video on that, but you can really see it play out in Jalen Hunt's sack because he came in unblocked because he was able to manipulate the pressure. Fangio was. At the end of the day, though, what got this team this dominant performance wasn't calling this play, or it wasn't calling that play. They've called this play and they've called that play all throughout the season. What was the difference is that this team and these players understood their role and their job and their assignment. They understood not only that, but based on the coverage and what they were doing, how offenses were going to try to attack with the personnel and the formations that they were throwing out there. So when you get an understanding of that defense, once you get outside of the 101 level understanding of the defense and get to that 201, 301 level understanding of the defense, that's when things start to get really fun. And it was definitely fun watching this game film. And if we talked about this offensive game was the Saquon Barkley game, well then on defense, it was a Nakobe Dean game. And he deserves his props because listen, he gets a lot of hate, and there are weaknesses to his game, but there are strengths to his game, right? He had 2 sacks this game, and this is something we talked about coming into the season that should have been a strength of his game and something that we'd see show off, especially with what Fangio likes to do. It was a good pairing, those two together, especially with how much Fangio likes to send his middle linebackers up the gut, right? So Nakobe Dean had 2 sacks, but this is what was far more important. I think this was a game where you could really see something click for Nakobe Dean in terms of his coverage. Really, and really what I mean is in terms of his understanding of where he needs to be, sinking into throwing windows, understanding where routes were likely going to be run based on the coverage and how the offense liked to attack certain coverages. There was a play where he was directly responsible for Jalen Carter getting a sack because he took away a throwing window to Malik Neighbors, which forced Daniel Jones to hold on to the ball, and then Jalen Carter was able to take over and get a sack. But if you look at this game, Week 7, 2024, against the New York Giants, and compare it to Week 1 versus the New England Patriots in 2023, it is a night and day difference. Now, is that going to sustain throughout the rest of the season? I can't give you that answer until we see it. But if you can do something one time, you can do it again. And I think we're going to see Nakobe Dean do it again. But we also got to talk about Cooper DeJean. And it's amazing how NFL ready he is. He looks like a veteran, recognizing formations, motions, and understanding how offenses want to attack the coverage structure, much like Nakobe Dean was doing in this game. But it's just amazing to see Cooper DeJean doing that from day one as a rookie. And that's a credit to this coaching staff. It's a credit to the coaching staff at Iowa and whoever's been in his life to help him understand what it takes to prepare for game day. Right? But this guy is going to make a good safety if he eventually transitions there or just becomes like a Kyle Hamilton type of player where you can move him all around the field. I'm not sure Fangio does that necessarily with Cooper DeJean and the solid defense he plays, but you never know where it might evolve into. But one guy I want to talk about because, listen, we got to talk about him. He's been getting a lot of hate, and we got to lay down the factors of it was going to be a lot was going to be against this guy to start with right away. And it was important that he came in and produced right away. And unfortunately, he didn't. But when you look at the fact that he just hadn't built up the equity yet, and then you look at he was replacing one of the favorite players of this fan base, and he didn't produce right away, you start to see the vitriol and the hate that Bryce Huff was getting. And the fact that almost nobody was talking about how much attention Huff was getting. All they were saying, oh, where's the sacks at? Well, go back and look at some of the games and what's going on. I talked about it in the review podcast. 3-game sample size of his time with the Jets last season. I counted 6 times where he got chipped. He got chipped at least 8 times in the Atlanta Falcons game on obvious passing downs, which are 2-minute end of game or third down situations. That was one game, and that was just one of the games. This has been going on all year. Opposing NFL coaches are respecting Bryce Huff. They know that he will wreck the fucking game if you let him, right? So it was great to see him finally get that first sack off his back. And once he got that off his back, you could tell he was playing free and loose, and he was high-fiving guys and just having fun again. And what was so great about his first sack is that it was against a chip. So you can tell that he is now getting more attention than he ever got earlier in his career. He was struggling with it, and now he's taking the time to learn and overcome. And when you look at Bryce Huff's career and his story, he really has a story that a lot of Eagles fans would really like and take to if he wasn't the guy that just came in and replaced their favorite player. An undrafted, undersized player builds himself into one of the most disruptive edge rushers in the NFL last season. Right? It's a real rags to riches story right there. So I think that tells you a lot about his character. If he was able to build himself to be that good and that dominant as a pass rusher, he can do that again in other areas of his game. He just needs to put that effort and concentration into it. And you can tell he was. And I know a lot of people say the difference between Bryce Huff is the 4-point stance. And absolutely, is him getting in a 4-point stance going to be better? And we talked about his get off times and on third down in every game before the Browns game, and then what happened in the Browns game. And his get off numbers were back to all-time elite tier times. By having him play in a 2-point stance, he still has a fast get off in a 2-point stance. But that'd be like asking Aroldis Chapman to say you can only pitch 92 miles per hour at the top at your max speed, right? And I don't watch baseball anymore, so if that reference is dating me, I don't know. But anyway, if you're not letting him get into the 4-point stance, he is going to be a little bit slower off the snap, and that is his fastball, is his get off. But the sack he got had nothing to do with his get off time because he had to work through a chip. And a number of his other pressures that he got were plays where he wasn't trying to get off the snap as quick as possible, where he was changing up his approach, his angle of departure and attack off the line of scrimmage to give the offensive line a different look. And here's the thing about Huff. He still has his all-time elite tier get off. He still has a plethora of pass rush moves. He's still transitioning to secondary rush moves quickly, and he's still collapsing the pocket if his initial rush move doesn't work. So this guy is going to get these sacks, and they're going to come in bunches, and he's going to be disruptive, again, in multiple ways like we saw in this game, where he forced scrambles and pocket movement that led directly to other sacks, right? So he's on his comeback here, right? And I can't wait for that redemption story because that video I put out is going to be pretty spicy. But moving on to Nolan Smith, the improvements have been coming along slow and steady, and it's great to see. His technique, particularly on his speed of power bull rush move, is improving, and it really seems they want that to be his fastball move. And if he continues to develop that move, it can really help set up his outside moves. Now the question, is this sustainable? They've now held half of their opponents out of the end zone this season. Can they keep that up? Yeah, probably not. But we still want to see this type of performance against better competition. Well, I should say probably this type of performance to a bit of a lesser degree. They're not going to hold good teams to 119 yards, but we do want to see a good performance against better competition because at the end of the day, you're not going to be facing teams like the Giants and the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs. They have to be able to beat playoff offenses. But at the end of the day, they did what they needed to do against a bad offense. And when we look at this team overall, coming into the season, I think we had to temper expectations a little bit because we knew there was going to be a lot of young players that had to step up and take on big roles. And we knew there was going to have to be a lot of players taking on bigger roles than they had been asked to do in the past. And there were going to be some guys that were going to be playing positions that they hadn't really played much in the NFL. But a lot of those guys are stepping up big, right? When we talk about some big time emergences, look at Zach Bond, right? Some of the impact plays that he's been able to make. And now he's starting to really eliminate some of those run fit errors and those coverage busts that he had. At least over the past 2 weeks, I've noticed a decline in that, and we should expect that to continue. And I do start to wonder, like, is this a situation where they may be able to get Zach Bond signed for a longer term extension and maybe get a bit of a discount because how many people are truly going to go out there and throw big money around at a guy that maybe is going to have one good, I mean, this is a good season, but it's going to be his only season showing anything, consistent starting level playing time in the NFL, right? So that would be a risk to throw out that money to him. But I feel like what you see with Zach Bond on film, his continual improvement as he's learned the defense, the impact plays he makes, his toughness, his tenacity that he plays with, that's the guy that you want on the Philadelphia Eagles. His versatility, like all that stuff is what you want on the Philadelphia Eagles. But you look at other guys like Milton Williams and Moro Ojomo are stepping up as viable pass rushers as well. They're both top 15 in the NFL in pass rush win rate. And they're higher than Jalen Carter in pass rush win rate, actually. But DeJean has been tremendous as well. You add to that Sidney Brown. He almost had an interception in his first game back in like 5 snaps. Right, so you start to get these young players stepping up. You start to get all these guys playing together, and you can see like this coaching staff is a good coaching staff. To see the improvements that they have made on film from week 1, week 2 to where we're at right now, that they have shown their worth that they are good coaches. And not only that, we talked about it. Learning your personnel. Well, you know what? Sometimes you got to give these coaches time to learn their personnel. You can't expect them to have the answers right away. They don't know these guys. They have to figure out who these guys are and what they can do best. It takes a little bit of patience. But when you get there and once they start to get it figured out, man, they've put together a good collection of talent on this team. And I think, coming into this year, I thought they could have been an average team and I thought they potentially could push to fight to close to top 10 defense. But, I think they can down the back half of the stretch. If you look at the last 8 weeks of the season, I think they could be a team you see that is in the top 10 in a number of ranks. And I get it. We're not going to play the New York Giants and the Cleveland Browns every week. But there is a lot of talent on this team, and they can be a thorn in people's sides. So we're going to see how this defense comes out next week against Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and that Cincinnati Bengals offense. But make sure to like, subscribe, spread the word, and until next time, go Birds.